So are you one of those people that buys a house plant and literally wants to see it grow into a bit of a tree? You're not interested in the plants that stay small and petite. You want an impact. Stick around with me and I'll tell you everything I've done over the years and what I've learned in order to get huge houseplants. Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So this is a much requested video from an awful lot of people. It is basically me going around and telling you what I have done in order to achieve some of the big growth that you're seeing on some of the plants behind me. And a bit of a spoiler, it's not all related to moss poles. And actually, let's dive into that topic first. Starting off strong with moss poles and support. So I'll use the example of the plant that you can see behind me. This is the Philodendron esmeraldense. And this, believe it or not, is not on a moss pole, as are a lot of my other very, very large plants. Like you can see here, this Queen Anthurium is not on a moss pole. I'll do a bit of a pan and hopefully show you a video here of some of my large plants. And most of those plants are not on moss poles, predominantly because I don't really get on too well with moss poles. Not to say that you don't have to get on with moss poles, but for me, it doesn't really do it for me. I will link another video, which ended up being a lot more controversial than I ever thought it was going to be. But yeah, not all plants need a moss pole to get absolutely huge. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of plants out there, as somebody very correctly commented on the moss pole video that I was just mentioning, that are obligate climbers, basically, where in order for them to be at their happiest, to get to the size that they could potentially be, they need to climb. Now, there is another layer underneath that, at least it has been in my experience, which is not everything needs something as specific as a moss pole to kind of attach to and create that support that it needs. A moss pole has a lot of benefits. It has the benefit of, if you're rooting in damp sphagnum moss, it's essentially a very long aerial propagation or kind of air layering, basically. So it means at any given point you can chop off that plant and actually you've got a cutting that is rooted already, and then you can just go straight into whatever growing media you want to and it will grow from there. And that is one way of being able to get relatively large plants. It's not a way that I have ever attempted. It's not to say that it doesn't work. It just says that I haven't personally done it yet. Probably should try it at some point, might do at some point. But there is a notion of people that are saying that if something like this is going to root into a moss pole and is rooted in quite nicely, if you take a top cutting and you've got the slightly more mature leaves that you're kind of looking for, then planting that top cutting, because it's got that size attached to it, could potentially mean that you're just going to see it level up further and further and further. Is this the case 100% of the time? No, at least it hasn't been from what I can see from different people. Sometimes when you take a top cutting, it will take a knock back and it might revert back to the fully juvenile form, and then you have to start the whole process again. Or it might take a knock for a leaf or two and then go back to the full, huge, kind of mature leaf size that you're kind of wanting to achieve. All of this to say that just because you assume that it might need a moss pole, they might very well be happy, like for instance, the Philodendron esmeraldense behind me, on something that's actually attached to multiple bamboo stakes or kind of janky support sticks. Sometimes, I think even now, it's supported against the plant shelf behind it, and it seems to do fine. Does that limit my options in terms of air layering? Yes, but at the same time, I have air layered this plant properly, the way that you would normally air layer, which is damp sphagnum moss in a bowl or some form of structure that you can wrap around a node or an aerial root. Make sure that it's covered up with something like cling film or some form of plastic to keep that moisture in, and just remember to keep that a bit more damp rather than having to do a full moss pole. The interesting thing that I will say about that is it almost sometimes has the same effect as it would if you did give it a moss pole. And I'm trying to think now if I've got a plant that I might be able to show you. Yes, I do actually, and it is an anthurium. I swear the amount of times that I've shown the anthurium cuticuense, it probably should turn into a bit of a mascot of this channel. If it survives, I'm not entirely sure it will. But what you might be able to see here is something that people that have been growing anthuriums for a long time tend to do, which is to give your anthuriums a damp sphagnum moss collar. And as you can imagine, this is just sphagnum moss. It's not actually providing any real support to the actual plant itself. If I wobble it, it will still wobble, basically. What it does do, though, is it gives it that damp sphagnum moss, the same that you would do an air layer, which means that it can start to root out a bit in that, and it kind of tricks the plant into thinking that it's got some support. Am I saying that this will work every single time? No. But it is something that you can attempt to do if you don't want to mess around with moss poles for too much. Next, I want to talk about something that might be fairly obvious, but a lot of us tend to forget, myself included, because I have got zero patience. Patience is key, funnily enough. This did not happen overnight. This took a while, basically. So you need to remember that if you want the plant to get quite large, then you need to be patient with it, basically. It's going to take not a few weeks, it might not even be a few months, it's probably going to be more like a few years. I will bring up a picture here of the Philodendron Burley Marks variegata that I had that pretty much did turn into a bit of a tree. Now, there's a couple of options if you are not particularly patient. One of those options being, get a plant that you know from other people and you've had this verified and you maybe have a conversation with them to see what that actually means, is truly a very, very fast grower, basically. And I am showing you here the Syngonium chiapense. I could have easily, it's not that easy to pick up, that's why I haven't picked it up, but my Philodendron Paraíso Verde, that grows like a weed. But some of these plants will grow at an alarming rate, especially if they're happy, and a lot of them might not take that much to be happy. So, and why do I say talk to somebody who has grown these plants for a while? Because what I mean by that is some people might turn around and say, you know what, actually the Queen Anthurium is a lot faster than I thought it was going to be. What I thought it was going to be is the key part of that sentence. So if somebody had already got it in their head that this plant was a plant that was going to take months to bring out a new leaf, and it only took 2 months to bring out one new leaf, for them, that plant in that situation, in their mind, is fast. Does that make sense? What you need to be asking are much more specific questions in terms of like, how long did it take you for it to double in size, basically? And that will give you a better understanding of how fast something might be. So for instance, I'll use this because I've got it here as an example. This was probably only down to about 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves down here, basically, when I got it 3 months ago now. So knowing that, you can then make a decision, you know what, you know yourself, you're not that patient, but you do want big, big plants, then maybe start with something that you know has the potential to grow big fast. Now, for those out there that can deal with a bit more patience, again, asking somebody who has owned a plant or owns a plant that you want to grow to a specific size, even better if you can find somebody who has got a plant close to the size that you want to get it. Instagram is your friend. Be polite when you're asking random strangers about their plants. They don't owe you their time. But if you ask nicely, most people probably will engage. And just ask, look, how long did it take you? Where did the plant start off with? How did you get it to the size that it did? Because that's the other thing you might want to be aware of. So if you're seeing people that have got massive plants, you don't know, unless you know and you've seen that plant over the months or years grow up to the size that it could be, whether or not they just bought a mature specimen, basically. And I'll give you an example. I wanted a big bird of paradise. I spent money to get a very large mature specimen of a bird of paradise. If somebody was to turn around and say to me, oh, your bird of paradise is huge, how long did it take you to get to that size? I'd be like, no time at all, because I bought it at a large size. I didn't start it at a small size. So you need to be patient with some of these things. And some of these plants, especially if it's plants that you already own and you're hoping for them to get big, again, that knowledge of how long it might take might temper your expectations a bit, because a plant will only go as plant. A plant will only go as plant. A plant will only go as fast as it can do based on its growing habits and based on your space and the care that you're giving it. So you do need to remember that as well. There's only so much, like for instance, if the Esmeraldense behind me was a plant that at the best conditions in nature without anything kind of knocking it back can grow 3 leaves in a month, I am not really realistically ever going to get consistency. Oh, words are hard today. Even harder. Consistently getting 3, 4, 5, 6 months leaves in a year. I've had words this morning. So consistently, you're not going to get 6 leaves in a month if in its best conditions it's only ever going to get 3. Realistically speaking, it might happen on the odd occasion if it's really, really happy, but it's not going to be consistent. So bear that in mind and just have a tiny bit of patience. This is a big one. Bugs will happen. Say it with me. Bugs will happen. By this, I obviously mean pests specifically. But yeah, there's no two ways around the fact that at some point or another, your plant, especially if it's going to take you months or years to grow, is not going to have to deal with a pest situation or a pest infestation. What this does mean, though, however, in terms of its growth, is if you are not paying attention to that plant and it gets an infestation, it could knock it back by weeks, months, or even years. So that's all to say, and this might all be really kind of obvious, but you all asked for this, and I thought I'd give you kind of what I've learned over the years. I knew I wanted the Philodendron Esmeraldense. The moment that I saw it sizing up, I knew that I wanted this to be a specimen plant for me. I wanted it to get as large as possible, as quickly as I can possibly get it to. There are a lot of other plants in my space that I'm not that fussed specifically about them getting big. So I'm looking at, this is the Anthurium querumalens. And this is sizing up, it's taking its time. I'm not in a hurry for it. I don't need that to become a specimen plant for me. But what it does mean, however, for plants like the Philodendron Esmeraldense, where I want it to become a specimen plant, I will hover. There's no two ways around that. You need to be paying that extra bit of attention to that specific plant if you know that that's where you're going to head with it, that you know that you want it to be big, and keep an eye out for pests, probably a bit more than you would with any of your other plants, especially if you've got as many as I do. And prevention is always key with pests. Does this mean your plant is never going to get pests? No, and let me say this again, it doesn't mean that it will never get pests. It just means that you will spot the pest at a much earlier stage, which means that hopefully it should then be easier to deal with the pest. Obviously, there's going to be other parameters. If there's a massive infestation in my entire space, I can catch it early on this plant, but having to deal with it in my entirety of my space might mean that it would take a bit longer if it wasn't just essentially isolated on that one specific plant. So there are layers to it, but pests will happen. Learn how to deal with it. Learn the pests that your specific plant are more likely to get. Now, I have done a huge series actually at this point, which is reviewing plants that I've owned and grown over the years, and I have a specific pest section in that reviews kind of series of videos where I specifically say what pests have been common for that specific plant in my experience. The good thing about those videos is that a lot of you have also commented about pests that you're finding on your exact same plant and whether or not they align with me. They might not always do, but do a bit of research, especially if it's a new plant. If it's a plant that you've already owned for a year, by this point you probably have experienced pests on it. If you haven't, good on you. But if you have, you'll kind of know what it's more predisposed to, especially with your specific plant. I'm going to say this, I'm broken record at this point. Your specific plant, in your specific conditions, giving them your specific care. So, and that will give you an indication. So for instance, if I know that, if I knew, and it doesn't, this one isn't a plant that is particularly prone to like spider mites, but if I knew that it was prone to spider mites, I would make sense. I would make sense. I would make sure that it had slightly higher humidity, because spider mites generally don't like the higher levels of humidity. I would make sure that I'd be kind of looking at its foliage on a regular basis. All of these things that means that I can preempt it, and even if it does happen, then I've got ways of dealing with it. For instance, if a plant this size was to get a huge spider mite infestation, and say I've missed it, by knowing that it's prone to spider mites, I'm more than likely to have a spider mite treatment that I prefer to use with this plant at hand, which then means I don't have to be struggling around or trying to find treatment, which I don't have in the house, for this plant for its spider mites. And the reason for this is, what I was saying is, it could knock things back. So if you've got a big enough infestation of any pest and you get to the point where you need to start removing leaves or possibly even cutting whole segments off your plant, you've lost months worth of growth potentially at that point. So that's why I'm always saying it's key to kind of keep an eye, be BDI basically, because you know that that's a plant that you want to get there. So a bit of forward thinking. It doesn't take that much more time of your, or out of your day basically to do it, but it will help. This is one that surprised a lot of people over the years with my videos actually. You don't need to repot as often as you think. And I'll use an example here. I don't know if any of you have had family members, usually it's an aunt, a parent, a grandparent, that maybe has got a plant that has been in the family for 20, 30 odd years, basically. And at this point, it pretty much has been a tree for as long as you can probably remember it being. Look at its pot and look at the size of the plant. Because the reason why I'm talking about relatives is because the majority of them are not as obsessive about houseplants as we all might be. So they're not going to sit there and go, this plant needs, it's been 6 months or a year, this plant needs a repot, it needs a repot, it needs fresh soil, and it needs a bigger pot, and it needs all of these things. No, they've just kind of left it going, oh, it's happy, it's growing, it's big, it's in a pot, it's fine. I might remember to fertilize it once a year instead of just giving it a cup of coffee. People that have had house plants or tropical plants in offices know why I mention that. I swear there are certain spider plants around the world that pretty much have survived on kind of dregs of coffee and tea. And they're still alive. That tells you something about how tenacious those plants are. But yeah, it doesn't need to be repotted probably as often as you think it might do. And I will quantify this because, again, I said people are surprised sometimes at the size of some of my plants and the size of their pots. It does add an extra layer of difficulty because you need to find a way of stabilizing, because if you've got a massive plant in a teeny, teeny, tiny pot, there's more chance that that plant will fall over. So heavy, heavy cash pots are going to be your friend at that point, just to kind of, or like attaching it onto something. There's a reason why this is attached to the shelf. Otherwise it would all tip forward basically. But let me explain my kind of thinking behind this. And I know this is something that, again, the grandparents used to say for a long time, specifically about Hoyas actually, where it's like, don't repot it. It doesn't like to be repotted. And this is just anecdotal. This is not scientific, basically. So, and by that I mean these are just my experience from what I've seen. I've seen this with my orchids as well. My orchids potentially get fresh growing media, but they're in the same size pot for the last 10 years now. Guess what my orchids do? They bloom year-round, constantly heavily bloomed, basically. Same with my Hoyas. My Hoyas have stayed in the same pot that I've put them. So granted, when I first get them, if they're in a tiny, tiny pot, I might up them once. I might do it one more time, just so they've got enough space for the foliage to get voluminous, basically get loads of foliage on it. But the moment that I stopped up potting it is the moment that I started seeing more blooms more frequently, basically. And you need to think about the way that the plant is reacting to that limited space. It's not ideal, but what it will do is it will go into a kind of fight or flight situation where it's saying, I need to either get as big as possible or give as many blooms as I want, and specifically if you've got blooming plants that you want to have a lot of blooms on, I need to pass on my DNA, thus bloom as much as possible, because there is a chance that I might not survive this tiny space. The reality is they do, and actually a lot of the times they do a lot better for it. And the reason for that is because it comes into the layers of care that you're going to give it, basically. Because if something huge is in a small pot, and as long as the soil quality when you first put it in there, so that's the other layer there, that you need to start off with good soil. So again, if you know that you've got a plant and you want it to get huge and you're kind of planning ahead for it, don't skimp out on the quality of its growing media. And the reason why I'm saying this is, especially if you're going to keep it in a slightly smaller pot and not repot it all the time, that soil or that growing media needs to be as good quality and as rich in kind of things like aeration, things like if you're going to put worm castings or worm poop, which is kind of more like a bit of a natural fertilizer in it, to begin with, because you want to give it its best start in life, especially if you're going to be growing in there for a while. You need to get out of that mindset of, it's fine if the growing media is kind of okay, I know I'm going to be repotting it in 6 months. If you take that, I know I'm going to be repotting it in 6 months out of the equation, and you go, that's going to be the pot that the plant is going to live all of its life in, what would you change with its growing media? Do you see what I mean? It's just a slight tilt on kind of the way that you would acknowledge that information and process it, and what your actions would be off the back of it. But yeah, keeping it in a small pot for me has helped, because it also then means that there is less of a chance, especially when it starts getting sizable, especially when there's a lot of roots in there, there's less of a chance for me ever overwatering it. Basically, there's a lot of roots in there. Am I saying you're never going to repot those plants? No, but what I'm saying is what you thought might need repotting once every 6 months to a year might only need repotting every 2 to 3 years. See what I mean? And again, I will say this the same way that everybody else has, and we're all sounding like broken records now, one size up in the pot. I've had to explain to a friend the other day, because she had like a 20 centimeter pot, and she just, I want to go for a 50 centimeter pot. No, step away from the uppotting and the repotting. I know we all like doing it, but what I'm saying is, for the slightly bigger plants, again, based on my experiences, I find that they do better if they're kept a bit more, I don't like the use of the word root bound, but essentially that, in the slightly smaller pots. And this entire beast behind me, I'll see if I can add the size of the pot and something next to it so you've got a size reference, is in a relatively small pot, and I don't think that has been repotted, oh gosh, 4, 5 years now? And I haven't even top dressed it. I haven't kind of like supplemented some soil on top. I don't think, no, I haven't. And there is something that you can learn from this as well. I had a very large Philodendron verrucosum that I got. It was growing in a really awkward place. I thought the soil was horrendous for it, because, or the growing media, because it was pure cocoa. I then decided to repot it, not to a bigger pot size necessarily, but to give a better quality of growing media in there. I even kept some of the old one in there, because that's a good way to kind of keep some of that soil microbiome or that growing media microbiome in there, so the plant wasn't shocked. It diminished so quickly, because it was just like, I've been growing here happily for years before you bought me, you fool, and you've changed everything now, and I don't like it, and I'm going to throw a hissy fit. So that plant went from a very large Philodendron verrucosum to a 3-leaf situation. It also got infested with pests because it started stressing the plant out. So proceed with caution. The next big thing, and it might not come as a surprise, is that fertilizer is key. So what do I mean by this? You need to make sure that you're fertilizing your plant often enough that it's happy. What do I mean by often enough? It's going to depend on you, and it's going to depend on your plant as well. So let me give you 2 very extreme examples. If you know that there's certain plants that are very, very feed hungry and they need it in order to kind of grow happily. I'm thinking now of, I had a spiral ginger, and I'll see if I can find a picture and put it here. And people struggled with that a lot. But I then did a tiny bit of research and found out that a lot of gingers, generally most of those plants within that family, are really heavy feeders. So it just meant that I regularly fertilized it at a high strength. That's one extreme. The other extreme would be something like a succulent or a cactus, where you might only need to fertilize it once a year in the growing period. And if you do it any more than that, you're actually causing more damage than good. Now, what I do with most of my plants, even my big plants, is, and I'm still using liquid gold leaf, that I will do a weekly fertilizer, or basically every time I water them, as long as they're not plants that are getting watered every 3 days, for instance. But if they're plants that are getting watered once every week or once every 10 days or 2 weeks, then every time I water it, I will weekly fertilize with it. So if the bottle might say dilute 1 milliliter to a liter, I might dilute half a milliliter to a liter in the growing season, and I might dilute quarter of a milliliter to a liter in the winter months as well. So there's always some level of nutrition there for the plant if it needs it. I will still remember every kind of 3 to 6 months to just water everything with water, just to make sure that I'm flushing any of those excess nutrients that are still stuck in the soil that the plants have not used. Again, these have been the things that I have done. It might not work for you. The other layer to that, and this is kind of harkening back to the pests here, and this is something that I'm understanding a bit more now about mealybugs, and not just mealybugs, a lot of other pests as well, is depending on how often you fertilize and how good your fertilizer is as well, you might not see any outward signs of distress or over-fertilization with the plants, but it might make a much more favorable environment. Specifically, I'm thinking about sap-sucking pests like mealybugs, like aphids. They are attracted to the sugars in the plant, and a lot of the times if something has got an abundance of nitrogen, I think it is, in the soil from fertilizing, it makes it that much more delicious to the pests. So the plant is happy, but so are the pests. So find the balance that works for you. I still haven't found the perfect balance for me, but I'm getting closer to it basically. And nobody can give you direct instructions about that specific balance. It is going to be very unique to you and your situation. Unfortunately, in this case, it is going to be a bit of a trial and error. This is a point that might take you off guard slightly. Be aware of what is around your big plants. Yeah. So again, I'll see if I've got the Philodendron Burley Marks variegata picture here. I think there's a picture potentially that I have of a ficus that I had, that for the people that have been here for a very long time might remember it. Right behind me here, it was like a forest. It was like a mini forest. It was probably getting close to 3 meters tall, or 2.5 meters tall. It was huge. Be aware of what's around the plant and also what you're likely to be putting around the plant. And I'll be specific with this. There's certain things that you need to remember. So I think one of the things is called allelopathy. Might be wrong with that one. I will correct myself at the top if I am. And I have talked about it in another video, which again I will link at the top there. But certain plants do release certain chemicals in and around them in order to minimize the growth of other plants. Usually it's going to be things like weeds from kind of competing too heavily for resources such as light and all of these things, even nutrients in the soil. So definitely make sure that none of the plants that you've got around, the one that you're wanting to get huge, are plants that are prone to allelopathy, basically. So prone to be releasing these chemicals, because you might be doing everything right, but the tiny plant right next to it that you don't care about is hindering the growth of the plant that you do want to grow. So that's one thing. The other thing is what is going to be around it for a couple of reasons. Because, and I'll be very clear, I'll be very honest, this entire plant shelf is probably only being utilized 20 to 30% of what it could be, because this entire Esmeraldense is taking up this much space in front of it. It's also blocking out a bomb load of light that is coming in from the window and everywhere around it, basically. But yeah, it is essentially blocking this entire space for me as well, because that's a reality that not a lot of people will talk about. Big plants take up a lot of space, more so than you think. So again, based on my experiences, what I will say is, if you're assuming something is going to be yay tall and yay wide, add 25% to both of those measurements. Trust me. because things happen, basically. I've had to cut back this esmeraldanus at some point because it was hitting the ceiling and it was starting to kind of get smaller, and possibly there was going to be a likelihood that it might have even caused damage to the glass at the top. So the realities of growing bigger plants. These are things that you're going to need to remember as well. And also, the bigger that they get, where are they going to get the light coming in from as well? So for instance, if you've got a massive window in front of you and you're not growing in a conservatory like I am, and you've got just a regular ceiling, the moment that it reaches the very, very top, it's kind of blocked itself from light because it might just be over where that window is bringing in the light. So all of these things you need to remember, and where are these plants going to live? Also, things that are around it. If there's something that's going to get massive, massive leaves, is it going to block other plants that are around it? Not only is it stopping you from putting things there, but the ones that are there might then start struggling. If they are struggling, it might signal to the pests to come in and attack that. And if they're that close to your big prized possession of a plant, they're more likely to then transition onto that plant as well. So there's that level that you need to remember. The other thing is other plants, and I don't know whether or not this is going to come up on the screen, but possibly a tiny bit there. There's a much bigger leaf that's happening right there. The Anthurium esmeraldanus is getting bigger as well, and that is producing big leaves. And at some point, a big plant next to another big plant with big leaves on one side and big leaves on the other side, they're going to start shading each other out as well. So size is key, and just be aware of what's around it as well. Other thing as well to remember, where you've got it, if it's going to get as big and wide and kind of take up that much space, do you have enough space to move around that plant? Not just yourself, anybody else that might be moving around that plant comfortably. Because what you will experience is plants start to kind of reach outwards with their foliage. And if you haven't taken that into consideration, you've only left yourself a tiny corridor of space to squeeze by these big plants, they're going to get knocked all the time, and you're going to cause damage to the plant, and then that could cause its own set of issues. So keep that in mind. And this is why I always tell people, they're just like, oh, I want to have like all of these plants being huge. I'm just like, you need to be slightly more realistic, because where are you going to put all of these plants, including everything else that you've got? And it's only when I tell them, so you want 5 or 6 plants to be absolutely huge. What 100 plants, if talking about people with big collections, what other plants are you going to get rid of in order to be able to give that plant what it needs to be the size that it is? And it's only then where it kind of dawns on them, and it kind of ticks, and it's just like, oh, and I'm just like, So be clear on how many plants you want to get huge and what that means in the long run. And I'll wrap up with light, the topic of light. And this is one that might surprise certain people as well. So obviously, myself and a lot of other people talk about how to kind of get the right kind of light levels that your plant is going to be happy with. The extra layer that I want to give to this is the following. So I don't know if you might be able to see. Yes, it's annoying that it's such a dark day today, because it probably isn't going to show up as much. If it doesn't on the video, I will add other clips or photos here. And I keep using the esmeraldanus as an example because it's large and it's right behind me, so it's nice and easy for me to point at things, basically. But some of these leaves are blown out. That's fine. Some of them are a bit darker, like the ones that you're seeing here. And these are the leaves that have come in more so in the winter when it's darker. Now, a couple of things you need to remember about light. I would always say lean towards the highest level of light that you can give the plant without it burning, even maybe letting it scorch ever so slightly. It's another topic that I'm not going to cover in this, but your leaves on some of these huge plants are never going to be perfect. Have a look at any tree outside in gardens and parks and all these things. And if you can find one that has got everything absolutely perfect and flawless about this, I will give you an award. But yeah, like the larger they get, the more chance that the leaves are going to get knocked, they're going to have issues, they're going to have all these things. Get used to it. Your plant at that size, unless you want to like drive yourself mad with stress, is never going to be 100% perfect. So that's one thing. So having a tiny bit of bleaching or a tiny bit of crisping on the leaves because of light, and I'm talking about a small amount, I'm not talking about fry the whole plant, is a good enough compromise, at least I found, for the sheer level of explosive growth that the rest of the plant is going to have. So there is that level. And I know a lot of people, for instance, the example of the philodendron melanochrysum, that I know a lot of people do want to grow a lot larger. And I know we've talked about the melanochrysum several times on a lot of different videos. But one of the things that I knew that people were struggling with is getting consistent growth and growth that was larger. But at the same time, everybody was just like, I'm giving you slightly lower light levels because I really like the darker leaves. Shall I spoil the surprise for you? The lower lights are great for getting the deeper shade of foliage, but not always when you're trying to get size. So as I said, some of these leaves came in the winter months, so they're a bit darker because I don't have an option of giving a lot more light. But the leaves that come in the summer are gigantic in comparison. Even if they are a slightly lighter color, I don't mind, because for me, it's the plant in itself, and I want the plant to be as large and in charge as possible. So coming into some final thoughts. Firstly, what did you think? Did you agree with me on some of these things? Did you find some of these things surprising? Do you do any of what I've just talked about, like the smaller pots, the extra checking for pests, being aware of where things are going to be and how they're going to grow around the space? Or do you do your own kind of little things and idiosyncrasies to make sure that the plant gets as large as it does? Because I know a lot of you out there that watch my channel, I've got, hopefully, I think at this point I've got different levels. So I've got people that might just be starting, some intermediate level people, and some people that have got absolutely ginormous collections. They've been doing this for a very long time. I'd be curious to know, if you've got some big plants, what tips would you give people thinking that they want to do that? Let's all have a bit more of a community feel in the comments. I like when that happens because it kind of means that everybody can learn from everybody else as well. But yeah, I mean, needing to remember that light isn't always a bad thing. You might get some slightly bleached out leaves, but you'll get bigger growth. Making sure that not anything around it is going to block it from growing, or that it's not blocking anything from growing. Make sure that you fertilize it enough. Always be checking for pests. Make sure that you know going into it that the process is going to require patience one way or another. You're not going to wake up and the next day you're going to have a massive tree of a plant. It's going to take time. And again, bit of a spoiler alert, if you are just getting that plant, you want it to get large because you want to chop it to then sell it as a more mature specimen. That takes time. A lot of those mature specimens, the reason why they are as expensive as they are is because it takes time. Even in perfect kind of commercial grower conditions, it takes them that much longer than any other plant that they are kind of getting to small enough size or large enough size that can sell, but not huge. There's a reason why there's a price tag, because it involves months, if not years, to get it to that size. So similar situation, if you're going to have a plant that you're constantly going to be cutting to then sell off sections of, or trade, or do anything that you want to do, it's going to make it slower. As simple as it is. And not all of your plants are going to need a moss pole. Some plants might be happy with just some janky support sticks. Some of them might need something like a moss pole. But the point I'm trying to make is, do a tiny bit of research and see what the preference is for your plant. There's no point of giving it a massively, like I would have wasted my time trying to give this plant a moss pole and creating a moss pole as large as it is. Could it have got slightly bigger? Possibly. But it's sized up beautifully without it, and I didn't have to fuss about it too much. So know that if you can going in. Again, research is key. Talk to some people that have got aspirational plants for you out there and see what they say. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say on this video. Hopefully you've all enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.